Are you a scaling SaaS founder?
Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds and those who don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where your marketing hits like an electric guitar power chord, loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you scale from 7 figures, which is good, to 8 figures and or a stellar exit, and that is outstanding. Together, we supercharge revenue growth, create premium valuation, and craft a business you're proud of and a life of impact and freedom that you absolutely love. So here we are at the edge of December, toes right on the edge, peering over into the final month of the year. And you've already heard some of my favorite Christmas songs while I've been out and about, even before I fired up my own Christmas playlist. And two of my favorites that you should definitely check out. One of them you've heard of, and one of them I'll bet you haven't. The one you haven't heard of is a guy named Gary Hoey. Fantastic guitarist, great instrumentals, and cool album titles like Ho Hoey. How can you go wrong with that, right? And the second is one you probably have heard of and one of my all-time favorites, and that is Trans-Siberian Orchestra. And yeah, maybe there's a little bit of a theme here. I like a little guitar. Okay, maybe I like a lot of guitar. And maybe that's not your thing. If that's not your thing, check out Mannheim Steamroller, some really good stuff. And the season wouldn't be complete for my kids without the Chipmunks Christmas. And that might be part of my doing, or actually all my doing. I grew up with it and now they hated it then, they love it now. I guess it reminds them of so many years I made them listen to that. And then, of course, my wife's favorite is Bing Crosby Christmas. We're pretty well rounded all together, from sweet picking guitars to chipmunks to a world class crooner. Pretty cool stuff. All very different styles. And I think we can actually learn something from that as founders. Standing out in a crowded marketplace is like trying to be heard at a rock concert. You are either the lead singer or you're just lost in a crowd, another voice that nobody's hearing because it's so loud. And in a world, it's like that out there too. And we've seen that over this holiday season. Every billboard, inbox, social media feed, chorus of look at me, buy this, look at this, awesome sale. And so, how do you grab the spotlight and keep it, especially in an environment that's super noisy and this time of year? So, I bet most of you have started shopping already. Black Friday, Cyber Monday, uh, always big deals, big sales. And retailers try really hard to stand out and compete for those dollars. And some shout louder, some have doorbusters, and others are a little more creative and long term. And there's a company out there called Patagonia, and I think about them often when I think about standing out. And so they are a company that sells outdoor gear. A lot of companies do that, right? But they've done something that is really different. They didn't just sell outdoor gear, clothes, or things like that. They really sold a rebellion against fast fashion and a pledge to save our wild spaces. So things that most companies, they're really about sales and we're going to give you some awesome deal or do something. Patagonia's taken a different stand where they really stand for something. They weren't just a brand, but really became a battle cry for a movement. And now that's not just standing out, that's really being a beacon. It's not instant savings, buy now, but it inspires lifetime loyalty. So it's picking up the dollars now, but it's for a lifetime. It's not just for a sale until 11 a.m. and then they're done. So top that, it's building a brand like that. Then they gave away the company. The founder, been around for a long time, 50-year-old company or so, multi-billion dollars, gave it away. That is all in commitment. That kind of standing out, that makes people pay attention. So, how can you be the Patagonia in your field? Here's a 3-step gig. First, we want to craft your unique story. And this is your anthem, your rallying cry. It's not just what you do, it's why you do it. Patagonia championed environmental activism, turning every purchase into an act of conservation. So find the story that connects deeply with your audience. Don't just copy somebody else because somebody else didn't. Hey, that's cool. But what really resonates with you? What resonates with your audience? What would you give away your company for? It should really stir emotions inside you, spark conversation, and be as authentic as a vintage vinyl record in a world of auto tune. Second, we want to innovate relentlessly. And here's where you play lead guitar on a flaming stage. Innovation isn't just about being different, it's about being better. Just being different doesn't instantly mean better. I mean, sometimes being different is just weird. But focus on better for your customers, better for your community, better for the world. Whether it's a product, service, the way you run your business, make it so revolutionary that it can't help but stand out. It's about creating the "I've never seen anything like this before" movement. Now, I've talked about the service levels at Chick-fil-A. That is something that really stands out. Disney, happiest place on earth. At this stage, some people are saying it's the most expensive place on earth. Companies like Uber and Google, they've become verbs. And we don't call for a car service or look that up on our phone. We're going to order an Uber. We're going to take an Uber somewhere. We're going to Uber to the restaurant or to whatever. We don't search for things online anymore. We Google them. They've become verbs because it's just so synonymous with what we want. And those brands stand out. And third, foster a tribe. Every rock star out there has fans, but legends have tribes. Think about some of the biggest stars that you know. They're not just like big stars. They've really built a tribe. One that comes to mind is Taylor Swift. You've got a tribe, they're Swifties. And this is something like the music don't. She's done some great things from a brand perspective and made some incredible business decisions as well that have put her where she is. I mean, absolutely. She has built a community around her brand. And you need to do that with your brand as well. Engage your community, listen to them, make them feel like they're part of your journey. And next week, we're actually talking with Adam Robinson from retention.com. And he's done a great job with that of building a community around the brand and following his journey. That's what you want to do. Take a look at what he's doing. And that's what you want to do with your business as well. But when your customers feel like they belong to something bigger, they don't just buy your product, they champion your cause. They're all in, they're completely invested. And that's where you get that long tail, you get that commitment, you get that retention over the long term. And if you need help with building community, check out the episode with Lloyd Lobo, where he talks about community led growth and just lays out the strategy right there. Great stuff. So, who's ready to crank up the volume and make some noise in this crowded marketplace? Remember, it's not just about being the loudest, it's about being the most unforgettable. And we do that through impact and creating an experience for our tribe. Our founder on Tuesday was Andrew Swiler, CEO of Lanteria and strategic maestro in the HR tech world. My two big takeaways from the episode were one, how they went all in on an underserved niche and were also able to tap into a global Salesforce. And the second was about how he saw leadership changing as the company expanded, things that he had to do to grow in order so the company could continue to grow. Our expert guest last week was John Barrows. He is a driving force behind JB Sales, and he brought real time expertise on SaaS sales, not just teaching, but actively selling, personally prospecting, and managing deals all the time in this environment because things have really changed over the last year. So if you need a sales boost, this is the ticket. If you missed either one of those episodes, go back and give them a listen. My guest today is Mark Donnigan, a virtual CMO for early and growth stage tech companies. He is well versed in B2B SaaS, and Mark helps companies build nimble, highly efficient marketing teams that routinely outperform larger marketing departments. I love that. Leveraging marketing and growth tactics that work, like category design, Mark turns visionary products into market leaders. If you are poised to disrupt and dominate, Mark is the strategist who will turbocharge your journey from groundbreaking idea to market triumph. Welcome your new favorite CMO, Mark Donnigan. Hey, Mark, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Jeff, it's great to be here. I'm really stoked for our conversation.
You are a master marketer and virtual CMO. How did you end up in marketing to start with? And then how did you become a CMO?
Interesting journey. So, how I ended up in marketing, let's see. When I was 12 years old, I discovered my school's Apple II computer. And through a book that an uncle gave me, in fact, it was right in between, I guess it would have been my sixth and seventh grade. And I think it was a birthday present, actually. It was a book on the basic programming language. Now I'm also dating myself. So
I started on
some
Apple
listeners
II
like,
Plus, so there we go.
basic. Yeah, exactly. But that book, and really, in fact, I tell this story now somewhat frequently because it's the genesis of how I got into marketing. So I'm going to connect the dots here. But yeah, so I got that book and it just blew my mind that I could write a sequence of what sort of looked like English, but commands, and the computer could do stuff.
Yeah.
Just blew my mind. So, anyway, I jumped in, and most nights after school, the math teacher would stay an extra hour and a half grading papers. And so he would let me sit in the back of the room, and then eventually he'd say, Mark, I need to go home now. So I would leave. So had a great time, and eventually, of course, got my own computer, etc. But I say that because I clearly have this technology bent. My dad is an engineer. He's retired now, but he's an engineer by training. And so, yeah, I go off to college. And of course, it was a foregone conclusion that I would go into a computer science program, which I did. I got halfway through it and I realized maybe I wanted to be a rock star. So I dropped out. I went to music school. And then I realized, oh, wow, poor starving musicians, that really is a thing. Like, it doesn't matter
Yeah.
how great a player you are. And don't get me wrong, I did play at a pretty high level, but I was by no means, I don't know, world class. So anyway, I went, what am I going to do? I don't, I guess I could go back to computer science. I don't really see myself sitting at a desk pounding code. I'm probably not going to make much of a living as a musician. So what do I do? So I found my way into sales. And in reality, I'd been working my way. My first job in high school was at a Apple reseller, and this was before Apple stores. So, I started down this sales path, and as I grew my career and ended up actually getting into a reasonable level where I had as many as 35, 40 sellers working for me, a mix of full-time sales reps and independent sales reps. We had a hybrid sales model, go to market model, driving 30, 35, $40 million a year in business. And so that was my path, having a great time. But along the way, I found that I also was either grabbing the reins of marketing or the job involved, hey, Mark, you're going to run sales and marketing, which in a lot of these organizations, marketing was a single person or it was whatever I did. But along the way, I just really found myself leaning into the strategy, the tactics, wanting to really understand, like, why is it that this message seems to move people more than this other message? Why
Yeah.
is it when we just dump product features that it doesn't seem to do much, but when you tell a story or when you're able to connect to a problem and you're not even really talking about the product, but you're talking about the problem, why is it that then that's when you get a positive response? And let me tell you, when you're in charge of revenue, you notice these things. Yeah, that then became a pivot point. And as most of our careers, I think, go, you look back and you say, oh, it was super obvious. This job led to that job, and this position to that position, and this experience to that. In reality, some of it was, I don't want to say completely serendipity, but I think everyone can relate to
Yeah.
being there. Yeah, so where I am today is, yes, I'm commonly introduced as, and if you go to my website, you will see the words virtual all over it. So I definitely refer to myself as that. But really, what I do is more holistic, and that is that I help companies win at go to market, GTM. And for much of technology today, and I only deal with B2B, so I'm not a B2C marketer. God love them. That is a whole different skill set and
Yeah.
experience base. And that's not where my experience aligns. But I do have a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge, especially in long sales cycles, technical products that have a very technical integration component to them. The buying committee is multi-stakeholder, meaning that this isn't, oh, we just need to go high and go low to get a little bit of support, but go high and to the C-suite and win the deal. So I've just developed a real somewhat unique mix. At least I find it's a little bit unique, where I can navigate this incredibly tricky sales cycle, but yet the pot of gold is pretty valuable. So typically these are deals that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to low millions, and generally on some sort of a reoccurring type sales model. So that's my journey from Apple II at 12 years old to virtual CMO.
Nice. Go-to-market strategies. You talked about that, and that's a really key component. So, what
Mm.
makes a great go-to-market strategy, especially
Yeah,
B2B
so
SaaS?
yeah, it is a great question, and frankly, it's the right question because a lot of times founders, and again, I also largely work. I don't get too involved in, shall we say, pre-revenue companies, but I'm definitely involved in startups. So typically
Sure.
in that 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 million to $10 million range is where I get involved because what I find is that as soon as you hit about 5 million, and this is a generalization, but as most generalizations are, it's generally true. You get to $5 million, and it does not mean that you've got your full go to market figured out, that your product is fully ironed out. There's still a lot of holes, there's a lot of kinks, but you're doing something right. It's just, with very few exceptions, it's just not that possible to get to $5 million and just stumble into it. You're doing something. So your product works, it's serving a need, you're connecting to a market. And I also find that at about $5 million for a lot of businesses is when they can start to attract the capital to really invest in what it's going to take to scale or to build out that sales team or to build out the marketing function or do all of it. So just for context, that's where I get involved.
That makes sense.
What I find is that go to market still for a lot of founders, a lot of CEOs at that juncture of their business is viewed as how we sell, i.e., we primarily have a PLG led motion. We have sales reps backed up by some sort of PLG or freemium, which is PLG is the new freemium. Or there's other paradigms, but it's, oh, that's my go to market. And so they describe, oh, our go to market is we have 6 sales reps. They're strategically located in these areas because we found we have geographical proximity, so that there's a need for that. And then we're starting to tag on this PLG. They're like, that's our go to market. My response generally is, okay, that's a structure. That's
Right,
not your go
right.
to market.
That's how you
Because,
sell stuff.
yeah, because let's step back and look at this from a customer point of view. And this right here, Jeff, is the number one aha that I hope listeners jot down or at least make a mental note of. Is it so much of what we do in business, I would argue, but especially in marketing, is from the company's point of view, not the customer.
Yep.
And so we wonder why we get into sales processes that are never ending. We wonder why seemingly sometimes it's almost a little random as to why a deal closes and why it doesn't.
Right.
Like, and I absolutely abhor this whole phrase of 50% of marketing works. We just don't know which 50. I can't remember who it's attributed to. If I recall, it's someone super smart in marketing many years ago. I would dare not say that they didn't know what they're doing or didn't know marketing. However, that is a horrible way to operate. And yet,
Right.
no one certainly says they operate that way, but we do. And
Right.
if you think about it, the go to market function from the buyer's perspective, all of a sudden the path becomes not crystal clear, but certainly more clear as to where we should be investing, how we're going to build a repeatable process to be able to affect and impact the buying decision in a positive way. And so this really is it's not the only, but it is one of the most basic elements that I find, whether it's big company medium-sized company, small company, earlier stage, middle stage of their growth and development, or they have a 30-year pedigree, been in their market for a long time and are considered a leader. I find that there's elements of this across. Just not understanding how the buyer really buys and makes a decision today.
Yeah, and that's, I think, changed a lot, certainly in the last 20 years, 10 years, and I think even the last 4 or 5 years in post
Mhm.
pandemic. I think that has
Yes.
continued to change,
Yes.
especially in the B2B world,
Yeah.
way, way different than it was 10 years ago and significantly different than even 5 years ago because information's
That's
so
right.
available.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? And so I was going to suggest, Jeff, let's talk about why this is because okay, fine. Some listeners are going, "Yep, I'm with you," and I even know it for myself. If I'm really honest, maybe we don't know. How did we get here, and then where do we go from here?
What
In
do
other
we
words,
do with it?
yeah, what do we do with this? It's one thing to know that I'm a little sick. It's another thing to know, like, what do I do to get
Right?
better?
Yeah,
So
diagnosing the
sorry.
problem is only part of it. We need a
Yeah,
solution.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So you actually gave a major clue when you said that information is now freely available. And this really, I think, is one of the biggest shifts that has contributed to the fact that I saw some Gartner research. I think I saw something from Forrester, and I'm sure all of the big B2B analyst firms have probably put out their own version of this. And the numbers are not exact, but they are definitely in the range. Gartner, I think, found that a buying committee was something like more than 50% of the way through a buying decision before they even contacted the first vendor. Now, think about that impact to your buying process.
Right.
What it means is, so there's good news and bad news in this. So the good news is that if you happen to be the category king or queen, or you're the leader in that space, odds are you got a phone call. Okay, so that's good. That's great because also the odds are that they only reached out to 2, 3, maybe 4 companies. Nobody has time to go through and interview 12 different companies, right? So you're on a
Yeah.
short list. Hey, congratulations. Now, that doesn't mean that you kick back and you're done, but congratulations. But the bad news is that for most of us, especially building new companies, we're not on the short list, not known. Maybe we are known, but we're not quite trusted yet. And I don't mean trusted as in they wonder if we're ethical, or trusted like they're saying, hey, these people seem like they actually have a really good technology. They have a good product,
Right.
but
Right.
wow, are they going to be around in 5 years to service
Yeah.
me? Are they going to be able to keep it updated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Which
Yep.
anybody building a new company understands this very well. It's an
You're
it's a
you're not
it's a
at the point
huge.
yet where nobody got fired for buying IBM. You're not there yet.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah. So this information ubiquity is contributing to the fact that if if we are not making all of the information that is required for someone to arrive at a buying decision freely available. And by the way, what I mean by that, some marketers are going to bristle. Stop gating your content.
Mm.
Stop requiring forms. Stop putting up these artificial hurdles. Oh, but how are we going to collect leads? Stop it. A buyer is in the market to solve a problem. If you give them the sufficient information for them to not go all the way to handing you a $700,000 annual recurring PO, okay, that's too much of a stretch. But going to the next step, which might just be go to your website and request an initial an initial demonstration, maybe, or to just send an email, or shoot, nowadays, so much business is done with a simple LinkedIn DM. Somebody
Yeah.
goes and they do a little search, they find out, oh, who's the head of product, who's the head of sales, who's the head of marketing, who's the CEO. Then next thing you know, this message comes in from somebody that you got to look them up, and then you figure out, wow, this is amazing, right? Hey, find your company, love to see if we could talk more about it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this whole idea that information is freely available then right there says that if we understand that the buyers are out there doing their own research. They're out there talking to peers. I've heard it called dark social, which
Yeah.
dark social is really just Mark Donnigan and Jeff Main's just talking on a forum. And I say, hey, Jeff, what are you guys doing, by the way, for a data management tool? We're really having a hard time. We're looking at these 3 or 4 vendors. What are you guys doing? And you say,
Yeah.
oh man, funny you should ask. We built it in-house. It's a disaster. We just adopted fill in the blank. What do you think I'm going to do with that? Am I just going to go, oh,
You're going to
that's
go check out
interesting?
that company.
100% at a
Yeah.
minimum. While we're talking or right after the call, I'm going to go to Google, and guess what? That's going to show up as a brand search. And then guess
Right.
what? Somebody's going to go, see, SEO is working. That wasn't SEO. That's called dark social.
Right.
That's called good old word of mouth. Yeah, we can continue to unpack more of the tactics, but this is really critical and it's very essential for marketing teams to understand just where buyers at.
Do you have a plan to make 2024 your best year ever? You want to create one alongside other B2B SaaS founders? The Champion Leadership Group, we take clients through an awesome strategic planning process every December. And this year we're opening it up, and this is your invitation to join us. Together, we will lay down the train tracks for all of next year so you can just plow ahead full speed. And I also give you a process you can use with your own team to get great results, and they can create their own individual plans that tie into your bigger plan overall. This was a complete and total game changer for me when I started doing this in my companies. We call it your best year ever. It's free for you since you're listening or watching. Check it out at the events tab at championleadership.com. You can learn more about that and about how we help B2B SaaS founders build amazing companies and achieve premium exits if that's what they want. So come hang out with us. Start the year like you never have before. You can get all details, championleadership.com. Check out the events tab and join us for your best year ever.
And every market does have its shall we say special cases. So for example, I focus largely in an area that is video streaming. I work with companies that are selling technology software solutions to everybody from Comcast to Netflix to Amazon to go around. And so all video solutions. One thing that is very common about that sales cycle is there is always going to be some sort of a evaluation. And the evaluation can be, does the product work in the way we expect it to? Does it
Yeah,
deliver the quality we need? How easy is it to integrate? There's, depending on the scale and the scope and what the solution is, it can look different, but that's one of the gates. So if you understand that and you understand it for your product, then you have fully baked into it when an evaluation, or some might call it a POC. It may look like a formal POC. Maybe there's different ways to look at it, but you're
sure.
going to have this clearly defined. And then you're going to be mapping your content journey. You're going to be mapping your marketing efforts against each one of these gates. And if you do that, now the buyer who's out there not talking to you yet, but they're in market, and maybe they're in market, maybe you don't. Maybe it's completely invisible to you, but they're able to consume, they're able to get the information, they're able to get the data. In a more technically advanced product, they probably can't, without your assistance, test the product or use the product. But if you happen to be in a market or your product lends itself to that, make it as freely available as possible. Let them get their hands on it. And this may or may not look like PLG. Some listeners will say, that sounds like PLG to me. It might be, but maybe it's something different. Maybe you're still in
Mm.
the enterprise, but maybe there's a way for you to give access to, even if it's a real limited subset of function, or that the buyer can get their hands on even that small, narrow portion of the product without ever contacting you, maybe setting up an account so they give you an email and a name and some basic information.
Yeah.
But other than that, they could self-service. And then that helps get them to the point where they say, wow, like I have an idea what this can do. This is really powerful. Let's examine this further. We need to get a meeting. So,
I understand not gating content And if we don't do that, at what point do we have the information we need to engage the buyer and reach out? How do we get that? Do you
Yeah,
have a way to do that, or is there a
I do.
certain point along the
Yeah,
journey?
I have. Yeah. So let's talk about this because
Yeah,
this is controversial. It's
I love
controversial.
controversy.
Yeah, exactly. I know you do. So let's be controversial. The marketers are like, but my main proof that I'm doing something is my MQLs and
Yes,
then maybe
exactly.
further my SQLs. So you're telling now, how do I prove I'm doing anything?
We're taking away the vanity metric.
Yeah. And so here, so if somebody is marketing right now in an environment where they're primarily being measured by MQLs, SQLs, I can almost guarantee that there's friction. Now, it may be everybody's polite in front of each other, but everybody in the company knows there's friction between sales and marketing.
Mhm.
I can
Yep,
almost guarantee you. In fact, I can say in nearly 10 out of 10 cases. Why is that? Because marketing is hitting their vanity metric number. Let's just call it MQLs.
yep.
Okay. Sales is not hitting revenue. Sales is looking at marketing and saying, yeah, we're not hitting revenue because these leads stink. Half these people, they won't even return our calls. When we do get them on the phone, they're like, "Oh, I downloaded an ebook. I think I remember doing that. Who are you again?"
Yeah,
And then marketing is pointing back at sales, going, "Sales just doesn't know how to sell anything, and that's
right,
why." And there's
right.
tension here. Now, guess what? Unfortunately, sales is more correct in this finger pointing than marketing. Because
Hmm,
guess what? We have got to stop measuring success by somebody downloaded an ebook.
right.
We have to. And if you don't understand the buyer's journey, you're still measuring success that way. All you have to do as a marketer is go out into the market and just if you have opportunity, ask buyers. Hey, let me ask you. You just completed this sales process. I know we worked with you for 9 months. It took another 3 months to close the deal. So we've gotten to know each other really well. Let me ask you. We publish white papers. We publish extensive case studies, on and on and on, all these collaterals. Could you explain to me, just give me a really quick overview, what role did those various collateral pieces play in you making a decision? If you're not asking, we're making a whole lot of assumptions.
Yep.
And what you're likely going to hear is this: you're going to hear, yeah, they were actually super useful. Only one or two people actually read the white paper out of our 6 or 8 or 10 that were involved in the process, but it was very useful. It gave us a good understanding of your technology. Hey, your case studies, everybody largely looked at those, and that was really significant to us, and this and that. But you know what? At the end of the day, and then what they're going to describe to you is that they didn't call you because of your case study. They weren't suddenly in market because they downloaded the white paper. It's again, they're more than 50% of the way through the buying process before they actually call you. And those are supporting materials. I am not suggesting that, oh, you stop producing them, but this notion that we gate it, that gives the right, if you will, for then a business development rep, which, by the way, don't get me started on. Why do we think that someone who's very smart but with no experience, first job out of college, is going to be able to sell to a CTO of Fortune 500? When did that ever become? So don't get me started.
Quantity over quality.
And by the
Yeah,
way, let's just look at our various performance of inside sales orgs and look at the performance right now. The numbers are in, and the numbers are clear, and the numbers are not good.
yeah.
So, like, and this is where I was asked the other day by someone, do I think we're in a recession, or is this business model reset, or what do I think in technology? And obviously, it's a complicated question because there's markets that are just going gangbusters. There's some that are keeping
Sure.
their head above water, and there's some that are very challenged. And it has nothing to do with the businesses that service them. It's what's going on in that particular segment of the economy. So I'm always careful to frame that. But my response was that just, there was too much of where money was obscuring very bad and inefficient processes. So
Yep.
nobody was actually stepping back to say, we have 100 BDRs and SDRs, however you quantify them or define them. We've got another 35 reps and we've got 40 people in marketing, and we have a sales and marketing org of a couple hundred people or more, and they're doing X amount of revenue. Does that even make sense? Is that the right way? Was there a more efficient way? No, it was just a part of a framework, predictable revenue framework. So, which by the way, on paper is absolutely amazing and
Right.
makes a lot of sense. Practical execution and the economics behind it, very different. And anyone who wants to challenge me, I'm going to ask to see your Salesforce data, and it's not going to be pretty. So, see,
Well,
controversial,
obviously,
Jeff.
yeah, yeah. Obviously, we're always looking for attribution and trying to figure out
Yeah,
how do we, make marketing investments and then justify
yeah,
making those bigger or smaller. And we're looking for maximum ROI, which ultimately is sales performance.
yeah.
So, what kind of strategies do you recommend for really getting the most value out of
Mm,
our marketing investments and
yeah,
finding that ROI and measuring it?
yeah. So and it's a fabulous question, because even for the CEOs, the founders that are listening to this, and they're like, "Oh wow, what he's saying is so what we're dealing with." But at
Yeah,
the and I get it, and I agree with them, but at the end of the day, they're also going, "But I get it, and I'm willing to rationalize in my mind this a little bit softer tracking or definition of what is the impact marketing is having." But at the end of the day, and again, thinking as a founder, I have to explain to my board, hey, how is all this tracking? And so everybody,
yeah,
regardless of whether you're the marketing leader, whether or however big the org is, or you're all the way up to the CEO, needs to explain. So attribution is always a challenge. Here's how I have found the best way to look at it. And then we can talk about maybe some more practical, okay, what do you actually measure?
yeah.
So, one of the challenges that we have, and again, if you are in a more direct response selling process, so let's say that your typical sales cycle is 78 days, just make up a number. But in other words, this is like SaaS, and it's a lower per seat license, and it's super, super easy for somebody to get in just with maybe not even a credit card initially, and they can start using the product and then they can grow. So it's a little bit easier to assign attribution, because you probably can look what marketing channels you're utilizing, what your spends are, what assets you're using in each of those channels. And so you actually can get reasonably close, saying, hey,
Sure.
we ran this campaign on LinkedIn, it was supported by this thing on Google search, and then retargeting, and we saw this particular impact on that order page or that landing page, or however you measure it, and you can come up with it. Boy, I wish I lived in in that world. The challenge is that for everybody else, we're dealing in these sales cycles where you've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, maybe 12 different people involved in the buying committee. You may
Hmm.
only know who half of them are.
Yep.
Now, you can argue and say, shouldn't we have the whole buying committee mapped? Yes, of course. And sales is always working to do that. But most deals I've been a part of, we've gotten to the end when we expected to close, and a new person popped up.
Yes.
you know,
Yes, that
oh,
happens.
hey, we need to set up a call and have this person in this role. They've got some questions for you. And you're going, oh no, like we have no
Yeah.
idea who that
Yeah,
person
where
is.
were they?
Yeah, exactly. So first of all, you have this challenge. Then you have the challenge that because of the length of these sales cycles and because of the shifting priorities inside these organizations, there is no organization that is impervious to incredible disruption of strategy and everything. So you have a further problem in that they engaged you 11 and a half months ago, because there was a strategic decision. Hey, we need to upgrade this workflow, or we need a better way to do this. And so let's go out there, and they engaged us. But meanwhile, inside their company, that priority has been started and stopped and shifted maybe 3 different times,
Hmm.
meaning that the original team of people, now I'm getting to attribution, but I'm trying to paint
Yeah.
why this is so hard and why the traditional attribution models just simply don't work. They either give false positives or false negatives, or they're just wrong. So what happens is, in this scenario I just outlined with these longer sales cycles, big deals, is the original team that contacted you, one of those people might still have been involved, right? Because maybe this is an area of the workflow that they're directly responsible for, or they're the most senior technical executive, or the most senior engineering principal, or whatever. And so they're carrying through. But all the people around that person are shifting. Some have dropped off, some don't even work in the group anymore, some have left the company. And so
Right.
now you got people onboarding and offboarding a part of this process. The problem is that you're trying to push to a close. Meanwhile, you potentially have people who are jumping on the buying committee who, by the way, they may not be able to say yes, but everybody in a buying committee by definition can say no. And I have seen way too many deals that didn't
Yeah.
close because the no's, not because we didn't have the yes. We had the
Right.
yes, but we had too many no's. And the no's outweighed the yes, even if that was the CTO of a Fortune 50, which, by the
And
way,
that's
is
for
a
them
real
as a
experience that
leader.
I've had.
Yeah, yeah. Really hard for them as a leader when you get those
Yeah.
no's to
Yeah.
override that and say, we're doing this
Yeah.
anyway, because then if things
Correct.
don't go perfectly, which they never do,
No.
then the team goes, hey, you made us do this. We told you
Yep.
not to. And
Yep.
so
Yep.
it's a very risky move.
That's exactly right. And I had to come around. I used to be, boy, I don't know what the right word is, because I want to present it correctly. I never would insinuate that a chief executive at a Fortune 50 or Fortune 100 was not anything but incredibly intelligent. But I used to have a view before this really locked in what the risk was to the company and to that chief executive to say yes when their team is saying no. I used to view it as almost a failure of leadership. Come on, you're the CTO of fill in the blank. Like, you have 1,500 people working for you. Like, just do the right thing and say yes. And it's very true. It's very true, because the complexity of the systems that a lot of times these products and technologies going into, the disruption possibility, the risk is very high that one person can make a decision. Yeah, there could be a little bit of a hurdle in the implementation, a little bit
Yep.
rocky. And then guess what? The team's going, I told you. And
Yep.
there's nothing worse than I told you. So, anyway, so let's get back to attribution.
Yeah.
So, I think we painted a very clear picture of why it is just in these ABM tools probably get the closest to giving some ability to try and map the journey. So, for example, whether it's HubSpot or any of the other very capable marketing automation platforms, as long as the prospect, the lead, is known in the system. And what I mean by that is, as long as we have some identifiable information, or even semi identifiable, semi meaning maybe we don't know down to the exact name and email,
Yeah.
but we know somebody from Comcast, and this location is
Right.
always hitting our website and we're tracking them. And we happen to know there's a whole lot of employees in Philadelphia, but of this sales cycle that we're in right now, there's 6 that are in Philadelphia. Okay, that's a good sign. We know it's a single person because same IP address. So it's not, and they've hit our page 18 times over the last 20 days, and whatever the metric.
Right.
So you can create this, I think them as like signposts that give us indicators of where are people spending time. How did we pull them in? Did they initially come in? So let's just go back to this fictitious but yet maybe not too fictitious. So we know that this is someone who works at Comcast. It's a single IP address because the system was tracking that. And
Right.
obviously, people can clear cookies and they can do all this. Nobody does. So that's the good news.
Yeah.
So we can track then the fact that they're hitting the website, what pages they're going to, how long they're on there. But we also can generally rewind to the very beginning and say, what was the initial referral source? You know, oh, it was
Right.
LinkedIn. We may not, but that may be just where it starts. We have no idea. Did they click on an ad? Did they? And a lot of times we will even have that information. But the point is that you have to begin putting together the signpost. And yes, there's some manual work in this. Yes, there are some tools you can leverage, but at the end of the day, the organization has to be dedicated to measurement and to analysis. Now, here's the rub, though, is that the chief executive wants this information the day before the board meeting. The minute the
Yeah.
board meeting is over, they're like, "What have you done for me lately?" And they come with a whole list of, "Let's go to this event. Let's do that. Oh, can we do this?" I don't know a marketing team anywhere, regardless how big it is, that's just sitting around waiting to do more stuff. They are
Right.
fully utilized. So it means then that now that person who, by the way, if it's a big enough marketing team, and it doesn't have to be huge, if you have even 7, 8, 9 people, you're big enough to have one person who's dedicated to platforms and analysis and the digital. But guess what? Now all of a sudden it's, hey Mark, I know you're busy on that. Really, we've got to spin up some new LinkedIn ads. And oh, by the way, can you look at what's going on with Google? Where we're not getting as much inbound. Our CPAs are going up. Oh, hey, and then when you're finished with that, we need to think about Facebook again. And so the challenge is that there has to be a real commitment to this analysis. I My view is this, and then we can maybe put a pin in it or talk further. I just put this up on LinkedIn just last night, in fact. Steve Jobs said something super, super interesting in an interview. It's like a little 2.5 minute clip from an interview. And he was asked about product and what makes a good product person, and product design and product management. And he said, it's content over process. And he
Hmm.
unpacked it further. And what he said, and he correlated it back to, and I'm intentionally going to not name the company he named, but a very big technology company that Apple was hiring. Now, this is like 30 years ago. He did this interview. This is when he came back to Apple, or is almost 30 years ago. And he said that Apple had hired a lot of folks out of this very big, very well-known technology company. In fact, it's a company my dad retired with, and they came in with incredible process and just absolutely world class, best of the best. The problem was they didn't have the content. Now, he
Hmm.
doesn't mean content like movies, white papers, videos. What he means is that it's like you've got this amazing process. You can explain and define, and you have data for everything. But if that's not connecting to how the user uses it, if it's not connecting to solving a need, if it's not connecting, and that's how he was using content,
Yeah.
like, why does this thing even exist? Why are we building it? A mouse really, he used the example that he was told, absolutely insisted that Apple cannot build a mouse for less than $300. That was the price he said in the video.
Wow.
He went and found a design agency that built it for $15. And so I think when we think about all of attribution in marketing, I think it's also really important to think about process versus content.
Yeah.
Process versus content, because we also can get all hung up on, but Is there ROI in trade shows? Is there ROI in this activity? Is this channel, why is this channel down and we're paying whatever, an extra $7 CPM or a cost per action or something? It's like, maybe that matters. Most of the time, my experience, it absolutely does not. And by the way, if that extra $7 is going to tank your whole marketing program, probably it was not the right, chances are for a lot of businesses, it wasn't the right program to begin with.
Right.
So we've
Yeah.
gone on a lot of twists and turns here, Jeff. I hope we're going to bring the plane in for a landing.
Yes. Tell me about category design. What is your approach to
Mm,
category design, and why is it important for tech companies to establish themselves in the market?
yeah. So category design is really interesting. There seems to be a kind of two beliefs, two parties in category design, the camp, if you will, that I'm a part of, although I'm maybe a little more towards the center, is that everybody needs to build a category. I believe that, but there's some important nuances. I won't say caveats, but there's some nuances to that. And then the other camp is category design is only for the richest companies, and you design a category by just being the winner in a market. Meaning that, like Salesforce, of course, oh, they're the category king or queen of CRM, but they're just the winner. Like it's impossible for anyone else in CRM to build a category. Yes, it's impossible for someone else in CRM, especially a fresh upstart, to come in and directly challenge Salesforce. That actually would be foolish. But what category design says is different than I think what most people understand it to be. And this is what it is. Let's go with a CRM example. Yeah, you want to take on Salesforce directly, good luck.
Yeah.
Even if you did raise $1 billion. Like it's just, and what's the point? What's the point? So why not look at it this way? Why not say, you know what? We have a very unique insight on the buying process of, I don't know, or not the buying process, but the business of independent auto repair shops. Okay. And I'm making this up on the fly, but bear with me. Independent auto repair shops. These are the garages that we drive by on, depending on if you live in a big town, every other street corner, there's some
Yeah, they're
shop and
everywhere.
they're everywhere, right? And some of
Yeah.
them are really professional and beautiful signs and others you're like, that's literally somebody's garage they're fixing cars out of. And no judgment on whether they're doing a good job or not. I'm just saying they're all shapes and sizes, right? Some are national chains with hundreds, maybe thousands around the country.
Right.
Others are just my brother and my uncle liked to work on cars and they've been doing it for the last 15 years, making enough to keep the lights on. Cool. So what if we had a special insight in that? And what if that insight showed that these are not sophisticated businesses from the perspective that these generally they're technicians, right? They want to work on
Right.
cars. They love it. But yet they're real businesses. In some cases, these shops might generate 3, 5, 6, $8 million out of just that
Right.
single location. You own 3 or 4 or 5 of them, and it's, hey, this is a very real business. And guess what? They have recurring customers, and oh, by the way, if you're doing oil changes, most people need an oil change,
Right.
sometimes every 3 months, but usually every 6 months, certainly once a year, depending on the car and how much you drive it. Wow, wouldn't it be amazing if we built the marketing automation and CRM system for auto repair shops?
Yep.
Wow. Now, okay, now that's not super sexy at my local startup founders group when somebody says, "Hey, what are you building?" You're like, "CRM for auto repair." They're like, "Oh, okay, cool. I'm building the next Instagram." And my response would be, "Okay, cool. Good luck with that."
Let's meet back in 3 years and see who made
Yeah,
money.
yeah. Let's see how that next Instagram is going. But no, go with me on this thought exercise. So here's the point. So the point is that too many, and this is the essence of category design, too many founders start with the we sell to everybody. And ultimately, there's different ways to look at it. But one way to look at category design is it gives an intelligent narrowing of the scope of the market that you're going to pursue. Now, this also has the benefit that it helps you make product feature decisions. Now you're not in a situation where you've got 50 users, 100 users, 500 users, but it's everything from doctor's offices to auto repair shops to landscapers to whatever. You go
Yep.
around all the various. And so the doctor's offices have this, they're all asking for this thing. This other segment's asking for something different. And when your engineering team is running around, and of course, the mantra from the CEO is, wherever the biggest opportunity is, that's what we're going to build. The
Right. Right.
problem is that you don't, by definition, you don't really know that. You only have 18 doctors on the platform. Well, there's a lot of doctors in America. So you know that quote unquote the TAM is big, but are we going to go win them all? I don't know. So it allows you to narrow, and it allows you, even the more beautifully is, it allows you to tell a very clear, distinct story. Now you hire sellers, and it's not, hey, go try and get deals. It's, here's what we sell to. Our sweet spot are those auto repair businesses that have one shop to five shops. They're doing a minimum of $2.5 million a year. That's the minimum. If they're doing less, they whatever. We just know that they either can't afford us or whatever. They're doing $2.5
Sure.
million a year. And by the way, here's a list of all the auto repair shops in America that fit that criteria. Happy dialing. Now,
That's
I'm
right.
grossly oversimplifying, but I'm not really.
Right.
That's how simple it becomes. Now, all of a sudden, you're building this. Are you going to build a $500 million company on just that segment? Maybe you would, maybe, because maybe you're going to find all kinds of adjacent products and services, and you're going to figure out how to go up market. And so
Sure.
maybe, but probably not. But could you build a really amazing $100 million recurring SaaS software business with probably raising a whole lot less capital than your peers and
100%.
own and dominate that space? I would say the odds are really
Yeah.
good to that one. So this is category designs. I know you probably expected me to jump into, oh, here's what it is, and it's develop a point of view, and you have a lightning strike, and that's all the mechanics of it. There's the
Yeah.
mechanics, but this is the raison d'etre in my mind of category. So
That's fantastic. We'll wrap up with this. And, I know there are a lot of companies that are listening and they're looking at and they want long-term growth. And
mm,
so they need that. They need it strategic marketing for long-term growth. At the same
mhm.
time, they need immediate revenue. And so we've got to
Yes.
hit our goals this quarter. We got to hit our goals this year. So how do you balance those two,
Mm.
the long-term growth with the urgency of I need revenue now?
Yeah, of course, because revenue is oxygen. And whether or not you're fortunate enough to be able to raise a lot of oxygen and it's stored away in the tanks, or you have to earn it as you need it, which is like
Yeah.
bootstrapping. It's oxygen. I think sometimes these things are viewed as, I don't know, mutually exclusive. Oh, I can't build the future and earn revenue now. And a lot of this comes from that we're investing in the future. Look, the reality is that investing in the future should come with some evidence that there's revenue today. And so I almost would reposition the question, or somebody said, hey, we're really struggling because we're investing in the future, but I need to make money today. My response would be, maybe you're investing in a future. It's possible that it's a future that's going to develop and that it's just not here yet. That's totally
Yep.
possible. But generally, there should be signs that somebody is willing to pay for what
Right.
you're building today that is going to grow more significant or be a bigger part of, again, I put in air quotes, the future. And so I would initially start the conversation by just having a really serious and frank discussion around, why are you not able to get any revenue today? Or why is it? I understand it may not be sufficient to fund the whole operation and all of the development.
Right.
But if you're saying we're investing for the future and we have no revenue today, then I would really question the future. So that's number
Yeah.
one. I think that really what this comes down to, and there is no magic answer. I do not have a secret strategy that I pull out only for my closest friends and clients and share it with them. I would say that it's really just as simple as, and it is simple, although simple is hard, right? Is to look really carefully at understanding, make sure you fully understand what you're building and where the opportunity is. Make sure you understand the building blocks to get you there. And I'm talking about this future, this mythical future. We're building for the future. Make sure you
Right.
understand the building blocks, and then try really hard to map how can we start building or even build one of those blocks, but yet do it in a way that we can get paid today for it. It may mean needing to adjust your strategy somewhat. You may need to shift your market. You may say, wow, in our core market today, that's not possible. If we were to pivot, it would mean having to do a little bit of product work. But if we were to go over here, that market needs right off the bat these three things that are foundational to where we know we want to go.
Right.
Hmm. Maybe we need to build those, shift the market focus. We can start selling there, and then now we're in closer alignment. Those are just some of the ways that you can approach that. I do not advocate for doing businesses that are too far apart or divergent. Like, you may have sort of a cash cow business, so to speak, and the cash cow may be just a $5 million very high EBITDA business, and then you're like, hey, we're going to go do this other thing, and it's tangential to the cash cow
Right.
business. And so where there aren't synergies, that's where you can really run into problems, because you can even run into problems amongst the founding team where they just get tired. Like, how long? Look, we're over here printing money from our cash cow business at 80%, 85% EBITDA. Meanwhile, we're over here just burning the profits, and we're not seeing a close correlation. And the minute that new business starts to slow down or stumble, or people just lose heart, and
Yeah.
then it becomes super easy to throw in the towel, which is really sad because so many great business ideas and businesses never made it to even really the starting line. Like, they were just almost there if they had just hung in there. But then it's like the entrepreneur throws up their arms and goes, I'm just tired of this. We've wasted so much money over the last 3 years. I'm just going to go back to my core business, and hey, I'll just be satisfied.
Yep.
So,
Very good. Mark, where can people learn more about you online?
yeah, my website is growthstage.marketing. So growthstage.marketing. And if you look up Mark Donnigan on LinkedIn, I am quite easy to find. So
We'll make sure and
be able
link
to
both of
connect
those
with
in the
me.
show notes for sure.
Yeah.
And do you have a podcast?
I have a couple podcasts. Believe it or not, the podcast that I am co-host on and that I appear on are actually in my industry. So they're not marketing podcasts. If you happen to like video technology, or you're just intrigued about how Netflix works and all that kind of stuff, I am a co-host of a podcast called the Dan Rayburn podcast. He's a very well-known analyst in the space, and Dan invited me to co-host with him. So we kind of banter around the weekly news and video technology. And then there's another one that I am on from time to time. One of the primary companies that I work with, called NetInt, they have a show that we launched called Voices of Video. And it's pretty neat. We do that one live on LinkedIn, actually.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that it's a video show, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. So,
We'll make
and
sure
then
and link
I'm
those in the show notes too.
I'm always on various shows talking about marketing and other things. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for being on SaaS Fuel and talking about marketing.
Mm. You're very welcome. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for having me.
Outstanding.
Thanks again, Mark, for coming on the show and sharing your insights and resources. You can learn more about Mark at growthstage.marketing. That's growthstage.marketing.
marketing. And as always, all links, highlights, resources, full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And check us out on YouTube as well. Lots of cool stuff there. Been recording on opposite sides of the country the past few weeks, SoCal all the way over to the nation's capital. So subscribe and follow the show wherever you are, and you can get rewarded too. Everyone who subscribes this week gets a rock opera recipe book. Combines the culinary arts with the grandeur of Trans-Siberian Orchestra, good old TSO. Every recipe is a symphony for your taste buds with a side of headbanging. Join us next Tuesday, where our founder is Adam Robinson. I mentioned that earlier. He is founder and CEO of retention.com. Adam shares the good, bad, and the ugly of bootstrapping a SaaS to 20 million in ARR and building in public while he's doing it. And I'll tell you, a little sneak peek, you are going to love what he is working on now. It's something just for us SaaS founders. Very cool. And it's something you may be able to get on a little beta. I'll share more on that next Tuesday. And the next Thursday, 1 week from today, our SaaS Fuel Expert Series, we have Jason Kruger, founder and president of Signature Analytics. We'll be talking about data gaps, increasing productivity, boosting profits, and operating smarter in this new world of capital efficient growth, which some of us have been doing that for a long time. That's a really cool insights from Jason. So I will see you next week. In the meantime, listen to some great music. Remember Gary Hoey, TSO, Trans-Siberian Orchestra, two of my faves. And as always, enjoy the journey. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/SaaSFuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.